Good Friday afternoon. It is October 6th. Time for our daily tropical update on Tropical Storm Nate. Still a tropical storm, but it has strengthened some. A lot of aircraft out within the system today. In fact, at one point, there were 3 separate aircraft flying through Nate. The first was the G4 Falcon. That's a high-altitude aircraft that was getting a better picture of the structure as it flew around and above the storm. And then we have the P3 Orion, nicknamed the Kermit because there's 2 of them, Miss Piggy and Kermit. This one was out in the storm earlier today, kind of taking an MRI to see the structure of the storm. They do that with dual Dopplers, lower fuselage and tail Doppler radar. So it's kind of taking a cross-section and doing vertical and horizontal cross-sections of that storm to get a better picture of how it's looking through the clouds. Also getting a picture of the wind speed at the ocean surface there as it's now back over open water. In fact, here's a look at the latest mission from the P3 Orion. Kermit there found a wind speed of 62 miles per hour in the northeastern quadrant of the storm. If you've watched videos before, we've talked about how that northeastern quadrant is always the strongest part because it factors in the forward momentum of the storm, the forward speed in which it's moving. And right now, Nate's moving at about 21 miles per hour, so nearly a third of this wind speed is its forward momentum. So that's pretty interesting there. Here's a little quick briefing on that storm direction and that northeastern quadrant. Always going to find the front right or the northeastern quadrant, the strongest winds, thanks to what we just talked about there, that storm direction and storm motion. Here's Nate. Here's how it's looking on satellite imagery. This is the infrared, and we're looking for those white cloud tops. That indicates the highest or the tallest clouds and the coldest cloud tops. So what's happening there? And you can really see in the last couple of frames starting to get itself together, kind of looking a little bit more like a tropical storm. It was really struggling to maintain that title just about 12 hours ago after it emerged back over the open waters. But these waters are very, very warm. And I also want you to notice here that you can kind of pinpoint the center of circulation right around in here. So the most convection is located on the western semicircle of this. It'll likely kind of fill in on the other side, on the eastern side as well, as it continues to strengthen just a little bit more. This is the time to do so. It is over a lot of fuel that's available in terms of very warm ocean temperatures. We're talking anywhere from 85 to 88 degrees. That ocean heat content, the depth of that heat about 100, 150 feet down. It's pretty interesting there. And this whole area is just ripe for some development as it heads to the north. All right, here's the latest advisory from 11 a.m. from the National Hurricane Center. Some things to note here. Certainly an upgrade in terms of strength with sustained winds now 40 miles per hour, gusts a little bit higher at 65, but the momentum or the movement is at 21 miles per hour. It has tripled its forward speed in the last 24 hours, and that in itself could be detrimental to this becoming a real beast of a storm, as it's going to limit its time over the very warm open waters of not only the Caribbean, but then eventually into the Gulf of Mexico within the next 12 to 24 hours. Let's go through the track here. This is the latest update. Notice it tracks it off towards the north, and there has been a slight adjustment off towards the east here, just enough that it looks to keep the majority of the storm, the central rotation, right off the coastline of the Yucatan Peninsula, right near Cancun and Cozumel, and that keeps it over open water, meaning little disruption in its strengthening. It moves north there, sailing, increasing that forward speed even more than it is already, and also a little bit further pushed east in terms of that landfall. A little bit earlier this morning, it was pushed right over New Orleans. Now it's looking somewhere along Mobile and Mobile Bay in Alabama by the later part of Saturday and early Sunday, possibly as a Category 1, if not a little bit stronger by that point, determined on how much it strengthens in the next 24 hours. It moves from there farther inland, gets absorbed by an incoming cold front and kind of torn apart, and then its rain gets spread out along the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, possibly spreading some of that rain towards the East Coast and towards Hampton Roads in our direction here, which we could use it. Been exceptionally dry. I want to talk about just the vast distance this storm is going to cover in just a relatively short amount of time. So where it's going to be located later on this evening around 7 p.m., just off the Yucatan Peninsula around Cozumel and Cancun. From this area all the way to where it's projected to make landfall in Mobile is around 650 miles. And notice the time frame here. That's at Sunday at 7 a.m. So it's going to cruise 650 miles in just under 30 hours. Yeah, it's a big feat, and that means that it's also going to limit its time, only 30 hours being over these very warm waters, so strengthening could be limited. Although it's unlikely of it becoming a beast of a storm, it has happened before. In fact, Hurricane Opal back in October of 1995, similar setup, although it was on the western side of the Yucatan Peninsula, but it covered a similar distance at a similar speed in about 24 hours. But instead, it went from a Category 1 all the way to a Category 4 in that time. There is one difference, though. It's kind of sat and meandered here over the southern parts of the Gulf of Mexico near the Bay of Campeche and strengthened a little bit more. We don't have that luxury with Nate, as it's going to be cruising northward. So that's some good news that it won't strengthen as much. So that's something to look at there. Very interesting looking back at the climate models from Hurricane Opal. Also, the last hurricane to make landfall in the central Gulf Coast was back in October of 2002. And that was Lily. So it's been quite a while for this area, at least in October. Obviously, it's been sooner than that with Katrina in 2005 and numerous other storms. But in October, in this area, the last storm was Lily to make landfall there in October of 2002. Let's look at the models now and talk about how this is going to be steered northwards. Now, the reason why it's going to be accelerated northbound is because there's an area of high pressure to the east of it and a low pressure system off towards the west. So that's almost creating a wind tunnel effect and accelerating that towards the north. All the models pretty good in consensus with that, all tightly grouped as they head towards that Gulf Coast, anywhere from New Orleans all the way to Mobile, and even a few outliers a little bit farther to the east in the panhandle of Florida. So pretty good consensus that it is going in this direction by the time we get to Saturday night and early Sunday morning. Here's the GFS ensemble. Remember, one model, run 20 separate times with different initialization settings, all pretty much in line with the same sort of deal, give or take 50 miles or so in either direction, bringing that same area under the gun in those particular regions. Out ahead of it, we do have hurricane warnings now. We had watches earlier. They've all been upgraded here in the pinks to the Louisiana coastline over to Mississippi and Alabama and even the western parts of the panhandle of Florida. On the outskirts here on the western side, tropical storm warnings have been initiated for slightly weaker winds in those particular areas. Good time to refresh yourself what a watch and warning means. A watch gives you a little more leeway time, about 48 hours in advance. Warning, a little more imminent, saying, hey, you know, get your act together, get your hurricane preparations underway 36 hours in advance or so that the event is actually likely and going to happen. That's why those hurricane warnings and tropical storm warnings have been upgraded. Despite its strength upon landfall, it's going to bring a lot of rain. Any tropical system has a lot of rain associated with it. Here's one of the forecast models indicating some spots 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 inches, locally heavier amounts. Not the most rain we've ever seen, but likely going to cause some flooding here in these areas. And also this particular area of the Gulf Coast, very susceptible to storm surge, no matter the strength of the hurricane. Now, here's a model I'm going to show you. This is a probabilistic storm surge values based on a Category 1 hurricane or slightly stronger. This part of Louisiana is either at or below sea level. So any storm is going to cause some storm surge issues. The colors in reds and oranges indicates a storm surge possibility of 5 to as much as 8 feet in these areas. So certainly something to worry about if you live in those areas and you want to get your hurricane plan in order and have that evacuation plan underway by the later parts of today, because it's a fast-moving storm, going to be there by tomorrow evening or so. And then we slide a little bit farther to the east. You get into Mobile Bay, where the projected values of this storm is supposed to make landfall. Also, some minimal storm surge values there. This particular area just slightly higher and above that sea level there. And we get into the western part of the Florida panhandle, not too bad either. It's really the parts of Louisiana we're really going to be concerned with. So the steering mechanisms, as we talked about, that area of high pressure off towards the east and to the west, we have that Central American gyre, that circulation that happens in the rainy season, almost a monsoonal flow. It's kind of putting this in a wind tunnel and kind of projecting it northwards and accelerating that forward speed. And right now, moving at 21 miles per hour. Quite a fast-moving system. All right, that's the latest on Nate as it continues to strengthen and possibly become a hurricane within the next 24 hours. We'll have another update if any changes happen to the track. But right now, the central Gulf Coast certainly should enable those hurricane and storm plans for some impact from Nate by Saturday night. If you have any questions, join the conversation. Meteorologist Tim Pandajis on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, 13 Tim Pandajis.